What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Estinien Varlineau. Estinien is a 3/3 elf warrior for 2 white-black that has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Estinien. It gains flying until end of turn. And, at the beginning of your second main phase, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of opponents who were dealt combat damage by Estinien or a dragon this turn. Everyone's favorite Dragoon is in Magic, and boy does he have a cool ability. Not only can he gain flying temporarily, very flavorful I might add, but he can be a great source of card draw in a deck focused on attacking with him and Magic's most popular creature type, dragons. In this deck tech, we'll be doing just that, using dragons and spells to make sure we can maximize Estinien's card draw to its full effect each turn. I also want to give a shout out to Mac, a good friend of mine who actually brewed this deck and let me use it for this deck tech. I'll link his architect at the top of the description so you can check out some other cool builds he's made. With that, let's get into the card highlights. We'll start out by looking at some cool dragons to run alongside Estinien. This first set actually serves multiple purposes for us. Their Adventure or Omen side can be cast to trigger Estinien's first ability, or they can be played simply as dragons, depending on what you need at that given point in time. These modular spells work the best for Estinien thanks to his abilities, making these some top tier choices for dragons. This includes Purging Stormbrood, Crystal Dragon, and Scavenger Regent. While not necessarily the most powerful dragons in the world, the modularity they provide is why they really excel in such a deck. And hey, Purging Stormbrood has a great enter the battlefield ability if you're playing against a counter or Voltron heavy opponent, giving you even more utility than the others. Next up we have a trio of legendary dragon spirits with death effects in Junji the Midnight Sky, Ao the Dawn Sky, and Kakusho the Evening Star. These creatures all have extremely powerful effects that trigger on death, and while we aren't necessarily running any sort of sacrifice effects, they're likely to hit the graveyard at some point, especially when your opponents are facing down an army of dragons. The fact that we also don't care if they die, or even want them to die, makes them great attackers, since your opponents will have to decide if they want to give you the death trigger or another card from Estinien if they're in a position to block and kill it. For more death-triggered dragons that make for excellent attackers, we have Icing Death Frost Tyrant, Bone Devourer, and Boneyard Scourge, all dragons that do something when it or another dragon you control dies. Bone Devourer is a great response to a board wipe, giving you a potentially giant dragon that will also draw you a ton of cards when it dies. Icing Death gives you a pretty useful equipment when it dies, especially since it can tap an opponent's creature, letting you potentially get in with your other dragons, and Boneyard Scourge is a great recursive dragon that can continually come back from the graveyard for a cheap cost of 2 mana. This makes a Scourge a super effective attacker, since we can be less reserved with it than other dragons, letting us potentially sneak in another card from Estinien's ability. On the flip side of death triggers, we also have some dragons that do something when they enter or attack. Hoarding Broodlord lets you tutor up a card from your library when it enters, letting you cast it for as long as it stays exiled. It even lets you cast it as if it had Convoke, and has Convoke itself, making for both an effective body and tutor effect all in one. Protector of the Wastes lets you exile 2 artifacts or enchantments controlled by different players when it enters, and lets you do it again if you monstrous it. The monstrosity effect also makes it an 8/8, making for a nice powerful attacker. Guardian Scalelord has a Sun Titan-esque effect, but only on attack. Unlike Sun Titan, however, the Scalelord can get back larger permanents if you're able to increase its power, and gives it another creature the same ability for a turn. Casting this when you have a large Estinien in play means you can easily return any permanent from your graveyard when he next attacks, getting you back one of your most powerful dragons to boot. For some dragons with nice utility effects, we have Clarion Conqueror, which prevents the activation of any artifacts, creatures, or planeswalkers on the battlefield. While this may impact us a bit, thankfully most of our dragons have triggered abilities, not activated abilities, meaning it's likely to do more harm to your opponents when it's played. Brainstealer Dragon is a great way to play some of your opponent's best spells, and can even drain them for a ton of life if you're able to get permanent cards off with its effect. Scalelord Reckoner is the best dragon to protect all your dragons from targeted removal, since it lets you destroy something of theirs if they ever target one of your dragons with either a spell or ability. Alongside actual dragons, we also have some Changelings that can help make sure we trigger Estinien as consistently as possible. Changeling Outcast does this best, since it's not only a cheap creature, but also unblockable as well, making for a very consistent trigger source for Estinien's ability. Avian Changeling is another cheap one that has not quite as good evasion and flying, but can still be effective nonetheless. Mirror Entity is probably the most well-known Changeling, as it can turn your army of already formidable dragons into actual monsters if you pump enough mana into its ability. Now that we have dragons, we need spells to make sure we can trigger Estinien's first ability to not only make him larger, but also give him some evasion with flying as well. First up, we have a cycle of cards in Defiant Strike, Sugar Rush, and Rebellious Strike that all buff the creature's power while also drawing a card, making for perfect cantrips in a pseudo spellslinger deck like this. They're all super cheap as well, and make for good combat tricks in cases where a dragon or Estinien may be blocked, making them powerful in multiple different scenarios in the deck. Blessing of Belzenlock, Unexpected Fangs, and Virulent Swipe are also all cheap spells that buff the targeted creature, but give them additional keywords as well. The Fangs and Blessing can give our Estinien lifelink, while the Swipe gives Death Touch, making for potent combinations in many different scenarios in a game. Virulent Swipe even has Rebound, which lets you cast it next turn for free. Since it's still a cast, its Rebound will trigger Estinien's first ability again, making for a great way to get a free non-creature spell cast for the turn. Since we'll be playing a lot of powerful creatures, and even have a pseudo-Voltron theme going with Estinien in some cases, it'll be important to be able to protect them from removal. Emerge Unscathed and Shelter both give a target creature protection from a color, while also having their own useful effects. Shelter lets you draw a card, making for a nice cantrip, and Emerge Unscathed has Rebound which, like Virulent Swipe, makes it a great way to get a free non-creature spellcast the following turn. Courageous Resolve also lets you draw a card, and gives your creature protection from all of your opponents for the turn, meaning no matter what color spell they cast, your creature will have protection from it. It can even save you from dying if you're at a low enough life total, or, if you're really savvy, lets you stop an opponent's infinite combo win condition for a turn. Prismatic Strands is another great way to protect your creatures from damage, especially any damage-based board wipes like Blasphemous Act. The fact that its flashback cost is simply to tap an untapped white creature is also great, since it makes the cost effectively free in most cases, saving you a second time from some damage-based removal. Oblivion's Hunger is a great way to protect Estinien from a destroy effect, while also letting you draw a card. Even if Estinien had no counters on him when the spell was cast, he'll get one from simply casting Oblivion's Hunger, meaning you'll pretty much always draw a card if you resolve this targeting Estinien. There's also a number of non-dragon creatures that can help with our overall themes in the deck. For our spellslinging theme, we have Monastery Mentor, which can make us an army of tokens when casting spells, and Papalimo Totalimo, which is a great way to drain opponents on spellcast, and even make them sacrifice their biggest creature on a turn where they lose life. Gixian Puppeteer is another great drain effect, but on card draw, not spellcast. Since Estinien's second ability should be letting us draw at least one extra card a turn, this can be a great way to get in some consistent drain after attacking with your creatures. It even has a reanimation effect when it dies, letting you get back either of the creatures here, or others that are cheap enough that have died previously. For our Dragons theme, we have Sylvia Brightspear, which gives our dragons double strike. Needless to say, dragons are usually big enough to do some real damage, but giving them double strike, that can be pretty much game ending in a lot of cases. Dragon's Disciple gives our dragons Ward 1, making them much more resilient to targeted removal, and can even enter the battlefield as a 2/4 if you have a dragon in your hand or already on the battlefield. Seasoned Dungeoneer works with Estinien since he's a warrior, giving him protection from creatures whenever he attacks. While this is already powerful enough in its own right, it also lets Estinien explore, getting you an extra draw if it's a land, or a +1/+1 counter onto him if not. I also wanted to point out some good removal options for a deck such as this. Crux of Fate is an obvious one, since we're so heavily focused on dragons, making it a near one-sided board wipe in most situations. Asterian's Thirst is a great way to not only take out your opponent's biggest creature, but also a great way to sneak in a commander damage kill on someone with Estinien as well. Austere Command is simply one of the better modular removal spells we have access to, letting you cast it in such a way that harms you the least amount while damaging your opponents to its fuller extent. Finally, we have some good utility cards that work well with our strategy. Lothlorien Blade and Sword of the Animist are both equipments that have a trigger whenever the equipped creature attacks. The sword lets you tutor out a land, which is going to be ever important in a deck all around high casting cost dragons, while the blade lets you snipe off a creature the defending player controls, crucial to make sure you can hit as many opponents as possible to maximize Estinien's card draw effect. It's important to remember too that Estinien is an elf, meaning the equip cost when targeting him will be 2 instead of the normally high cost of 5. Resourceful Defense is a great backup card in case Estinien is removed, since all of his accumulated counters will go to the enchantment instead of disappearing. These can then be put back onto him when recast, or even to another dragon, letting you potentially swoop in and kill an unsuspecting opponent with combat damage. Dragon's Horde and Dragonstorm Globe are both great mana rocks that work with our dragon theme, since the Globe makes our dragons bigger when they enter, and the Horde lets us have an extra source of card draw in cases we need it in a pinch. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include more useful dragons in Sunscorched Regent and Feral Deathgorger, useful card draw effects in Ancient Craving and Parting Thoughts, and more non-creature spells to trigger Estinien in Transpose and Aura Blast. Estinien is such a unique and cool commander. The fact that he can combine two disparate archetypes, Spellslinger and Dragon Typal, makes him not only an interesting deck to build, but also one that's unlike pretty much anything else in Magic. You can really go either way with them. If you want to swing more heavily into the Spellslinger and make it a Voltron-style deck, you definitely can. Or if you want to go a more dragon-focused deck, that'll work as well. Honestly, I think trying to combine the two is going to get you the most bang for your buck with Estinien. It does make the deck building a bit harder, since you need to make sure you adequately balance the two strategies, but it'll make for an incredible deck if done properly. That's exactly what this deck does, in my opinion. It combines the two in such a way that you really do get the best of both worlds, as it were. As far as downsides go, one of the ones I will mention is that black and white aren't exactly known for being the best dragon colors, so your options are a bit more limited than with other dragon-based commander decks. Likewise, if your opponents are playing their own dragon deck, or a deck that heavily focuses on flying, getting Estinien's second trigger to go off will be a bit harder, stifling one of your best card advantage engines pretty significantly. Still, in games outside of those specific situations, Estinien can really shine as both a payoff and an engine, making him a great commander to build a deck around. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Estinien Varlineau. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the archetype link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.